Once upon a time, in a kingdom where laughter floated like music and the moonlight often seemed to paint dreams on the rooftops, there lived a young girl named Ella. She had once known the warmth of a mother, as lullaby, and the strength of a father, as embrace. But fate had taken both parents away, leaving her in the care of her stepmother and two stepsisters. They called her Cinderella, for she was always covered in cinders from tending the hearth. And though the name was meant to sting, Ella bore it with quiet dignity, as if even the ashes could not smother the light within her heart. Her stepmother's house, tall and proud with polished windows and carved balconies, was not a home for Ella. By dawn she was awake, sweeping floors that gleamed like mirrors for others to trample upon, scrubbing stone steps that led to grand chambers she was never allowed to rest in, and stitching gowns of satin and lace that would never touch her own skin. The sisters, Drizella and Anastasia, twirled about in jewels and perfumes, laughing at Ella as though cruelty were a fine sport. Yet even in the darkest corners of the kitchen where she slept on a thin blanket near the fireplace, Ella's spirit found solace in the small wonders of the world. The chirping of birds who fluttered in through the open window, the scampering of mice who became her companions, and the endless sky she watched whenever she slipped outside for a breath of freedom. One bright morning, as Ella knelt in the garden pulling weeds, the air suddenly shifted with excitement. A royal messenger galloped down the village street, blowing a trumpet that startled even the birds. The proclamation was clear and bold. The king, in honor of his beloved son Prince Henry, was hosting a grand ball. Every maiden in the land was invited, for the prince was to choose his bride. The sisters shrieked with delight, already spinning fantasies of golden carriages and jeweled crowns. The stepmother's eyes gleamed with ambition, for what better path to fortune and power than a daughter married to the prince himself? That very day, the house was filled with a storm of preparations. Fabrics rustled, ribbons tangled, and tempers flared as the sisters demanded gowns finer than the stars. Ella worked tirelessly at the needle and thread, sewing hems until her fingers ached. She polished slippers until they shone like glass, though not for her own feet. She braided hair, fetched ribbons, and endured scolding voices that treated her like less than a shadow. Yet deep in her heart, a small dream flickered like a candle. Could she, too, not go to the ball? For she was as much a maiden of the kingdom as any other. When she gathered the courage to ask, her stepmother's smile was sharp as broken glass. "Of course, child," she said sweetly, though her tone dripped with mockery. "If you finish every chore, if you find yourself a gown suitable, then you may go." The sisters smirked, for they knew the list of tasks was endless. Still, Ella worked harder than ever. That night in the attic chest, she found her late mother's dress, a simple gown, but stitched with love. With help from her bird and mouse friends, she altered it, adding ribbons and beads left behind by careless sisters. When she tried it on, her reflection whispered back a hope she had nearly forgotten. She was beautiful. But hope, as fragile as glass, can be shattered. When the sisters saw her in the gown, jealousy burned through them. With greedy hands they tore at the beads and ribbons, ripping the fabric until it lay in tatters. Their laughter echoed as they swept out the door, leaving Ella collapsed in tears, her dream crushed beneath their cruelty. Alone in the garden, she wept until the stars blurred above her. It was then that the air shimmered with a glow unlike any torch or lantern. From the soft light stepped a woman draped in silver, her eyes kind and filled with gentle mischief. "Why such tears, dear child?" she asked. Ella blinked, half believing she had dreamed her into being. "Because I wished only to go to the ball." The woman smiled. "And so you shall, for I am your fairy godmother, and tonight, my dear, magic will answer kindness." With a wave of her wand, a pumpkin transformed into a golden carriage, its wheels gleaming like morning sun. Mice grew into fine white horses, standing tall and proud. A rat became the coachman, and lizards at the garden wall turned into footmen dressed in velvet. Ella gasped, her heart fluttering, but when she glanced at her torn dress, sadness returned. The fairy godmother only winked, lifted her wand, and in a swirl of sparkles the rags became a gown of shimmering blue, flowing like moonlit water. Around her feet appeared delicate slippers crafted not of leather or silk, but of purest glass catching every star's reflection. "Go, child, and dance," said the fairy godmother. "But remember, at the stroke of midnight, the magic will fade." Ella promised, and with trembling joy, stepped into the carriage that swept her toward destiny. At the palace, the ball glittered like a dream. Chandeliers blazed with hundreds of candles. Music soared across the marble hall, and nobles in jewels and silks mingled like peacocks in a garden. Yet when Ella entered, the room seemed to pause. Her beauty, radiant not only from the gown but from the kindness in her eyes, silenced whispers and stilled movements. Prince Henry, who had grown weary of false smiles and shallow words, felt his heart leap the instant he saw her. He approached, bowing with grace. "May I have this dance?" Ella, nervous yet strangely certain, placed her hand in his. As the music rose, they danced across the floor as though the stars themselves guided their steps. They spoke little, but their hearts seemed to recognize one another in every glance, every smile. Hours slipped like minutes, yet the clock, merciless as ever, struck 12. Ella gasped, remembering her promise. She fled the ballroom, the prince calling after her. Down the grand staircase she ran, but in her haste, one slipper slipped from her foot, clattering onto the marble. She did not stop to retrieve it. In the courtyard, the carriage dissolved into a pumpkin, the horses into mice. Her gown faded back to rags, and barefoot she vanished into the night, leaving only the single glass slipper as proof she had ever been there. The prince, clutching the slipper, vowed he would find the maiden whose foot fit perfectly within it. Days passed as royal guards carried the slipper from village to village. Many tried to force their feet into its delicate curve, but none succeeded. At last, they arrived at Ella's home. Drizella and Anastasia each attempted, squeezing and complaining, but the glass slipper would not yield. The stepmother, sly and fearful, tried to bar Ella from even approaching, but the prince's eyes, catching hers as she stepped shyly forward, recognized the truth before the slipper even touched her foot. With trembling hands, Ella slipped her foot inside, and the shoe fit as though it had been made for her. And indeed it had. The prince smiled, his heart alight with certainty. "It is you," he whispered. Before all gathered, he knelt and asked, "Will you be my bride?" Ella, eyes brimming with tears of joy, nodded. The palace bells rang in celebration, and soon the kingdom rejoiced in a wedding of beauty and love. The girl who had once slept in ashes now walked in light, not because she wore a crown, but because she had never let cruelty extinguish her kindness. And so, Cinderella's story lived on, a tale whispered to children by moonlight, reminding them that even in the darkest nights hope can sparkle, dreams can bloom, and love can transform the smallest cinder into a flame bright enough to guide a kingdom.